special thank you to Professor He Chanfei for having invited me, along with the others who organized this extremely interesting series of talks. I certainly have learned a lot today. I guess we all have learned a lot. I need to, first of all, make a disclaimer. I am not an expert in megacity development. So this is your chance to leave if you're not interested in hearing what I have to say. I'm an urban planner, and most of my work has been focused on the city itself and development of the city, especially Chinese cities. And so this title is really rather some reflections on space and movement in a very large city, which includes Beijing, and I'm based here, and we have done some work on Beijing and some work in other cities in China. And so this particular topic on the megacity has made me think, what do I know as an urban planner working at a different scale that might inform what we might do at the larger scale of the megacity? Now, I also find it curious, because I've been around a while, that this megacity theme and problem has suddenly emerged. And we have seen this growing for a very long time, but suddenly it seems to have become a critical issue, and maybe particularly in China, which will have a large proportion of future megacities if we measure them in terms of cities of 10 million or more. But I have to remind myself that this famous figure of 53% of the Chinese population being urban, numbers like this can reveal something. They can also hide something. As we heard from Cindy Fan this morning, over 20% of that population is in fact without urban hukao. So they have no urban status in the cities, and one could regard them as temporary residents. I mention this in particular because I'm thinking of something a senior government official in Shenzhen said to me: "We really want them to go home," quote unquote. Okay, so that's one thing that's sort of being hidden. And the other thing is, after the year 2000, really this started before, in the late 1990s, under direction of the central government, there was an encouragement of cities to annex districts. We heard that in a previous talk. So cities expanded spatially tremendously over large areas. Chongqing was always a megacity, as far as I know, had tens of millions of people, but incorporated a huge rural area. And now all of the megacities in China are actually incorporating large rural areas. So, these numbers are a bit strange when you look at them. So my focus will be largely on space and movement. Very typical for sort of urban planners to be concerned with that. Maybe we're all interested in space and movement. And I guess as an urban planning person, researcher I'll call myself, I'm not really a practitioner anymore, I'm nevertheless interested in how we can solve the so-called problems of the very large city. So I'm going to try to say something about that. I think the space and movement in very large cities and megacities is said to be somehow different. Certainly the flows are scaled increases, very large increases over what we have been experiencing using urban planning practices for cities of several million. Suddenly we have tens of millions of people. Do we have models for the handling of those kinds of flows at that scale? I want to say something about monocentric versus polycentric development, and this is a bit of history as well. I was struck by the fact, when I was doing some research on the emerging CBD in China, which resulted in a book came out last year, that in the 1990s, cities had very much focused on polycentric development, in particular in terms of employment distribution. So, and assigning certain activities to certain of those so-called CBDs. And after China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, the urban plans changed quite dramatically, and there was a refocus on one central CBD to meet the globalization challenges, presumably. So we have strong monocentric development having happened after 2000 in those same cities, which has consequences in terms of the flows of people in cities, as we already heard previously. So the planning approaches I would like to focus on are not high-tech solutions. Not that high-tech solutions might not bring solutions, but I think that we are tending to ignore some of the things that we could actually do using more traditional planning techniques. So I want to focus on that in the second part of this talk. And I will use some illustrations from some of the work that we have done in our laboratory and from the work of some others in China. Okay, so the case of well-organized regional transportation is perhaps Tokyo. You can read a lot of things on the internet about how Tokyo's transportation system is, in particular the public transportation system, is well organized. However, I have to say that commuters in Tokyo, according to surveys, are even less happy with their daily commutes than commuters in Beijing. And Beijing commuters, at least from peri-urban areas, are not happy with their commutes, to say the least. The structure of the city is somewhat different. Certainly Tokyo followed the rail lines to the hinterland over the Kanto Plain after the Second World War under conditions of very rapid growth. And Beijing is different, of course, because it's centered in a rural plain. As we just heard, we have the impoverishment of villages that are far away and the industrial development of villages that are quite close to the built-up area of Beijing. But just in terms of the total population and the total areas, they seem to be more or less equivalent. But how the density is distributed over these two cases is also quite different. I want to focus on that a little bit. But before I do that, I just want to say something about commute times. These are from the work of my former student, Dr. Sun, and his PhD thesis. So he was investigating a lot of the commuting patterns of people in peri-urban Beijing, which, as we know, is the fastest growing part of Beijing. And these are typical one-way times in minutes. So we're talking quite a lot of time to travel to the core area from these areas, regardless of the direction that you want to travel in, and regardless of the mode you choose. There may be more comfort associated with sitting in a car in a traffic jam, but the times involved are roughly equivalent. Times are somewhat greater in Tokyo. You could argue that it's more comfortable. At least Tokyo commuters don't think it's more comfortable. But this becomes a serious issue in the context of poorer people being relocated beyond the 6th Ring Road and having to make increasingly long commutes. And this is part of an emerging policy for Beijing, which I will say a little more about. So these very long commutes in mega regions or megacities is a serious issue we need to address. And I would like to suggest that we can address them, and not necessarily by building more transport infrastructure, which in the case of Beijing will be actually very difficult physically. Okay, there are a number of differences between, say, Beijing and Tokyo across the urban area. Certainly in central parts of the city of Tokyo, there's a much higher density of metro lines and metro stations, some of them connected with underground development. That has not happened typically in the Beijing case. The distances between metro stations in Beijing are much greater than in the Tokyo case. And you can read the numbers, but overall in the central part of the city, although Tokyo has a much lower in terms of buildings than Beijing currently, the density is much higher. Okay, so that is an important difference. It of course works together with the fact that there's a much higher density of metro lines. In terms of the total number of kilometers, that's over 2013, so this is already somewhat out of date, although Tokyo is continuing to build underground rail as well. You see the differences there. They're not very great in terms of the total kilometers of rail line per million population. But road density is remarkably different. As has been said, quite often in China we have these super blocks, and we have road traffic concentrated on the major arterial system, and we don't have this internal road system and small road system, which typically characterizes Tokyo. So that's a major difference. The car per population figure is a bit misleading because the cars on the road in Beijing are on the road about 3 times as long as they are in Tokyo. So in other words, there are more cars on the road typically in Beijing than in Tokyo at any one given time. Okay, so that's a quick comparison of these two cities. I'm trying to say maybe Tokyo is a kind of model. I hear this all the time in China, but in some ways I don't think it is entirely a model. In terms of building density, I have some concerns about the way Beijing has been building. We have heard that Beijing is maybe too dense. Okay, I'll come back to that a little bit later. But the net density, floor area ratio beyond the 5th Ring Road, that is the new developments that have been built since 2006, are around 2.0. But the gross density is lower than that, 1.7. This isn't extremely high, as you probably know. And what makes up the difference, of course, is a lot of infrastructure and a lot of space taken up with so-called infrastructure. We can compare that with the 2nd arrondissement in Paris, 5.6 FAR, and this is largely residential environment, not commercial. So across the city, the most densely inhabited areas are the Hutong areas, Shise in particular, 370, we measured that ourselves. It's pretty high density and is sort of comparable with some of the cases that you can see, not quite comparable with Hong Kong, but nevertheless comparable with some of the European cases. And of those larger whole districts, Xicheng being the classic case of 258 persons per hectare. Well, are these astonishingly high? What I'm saying is I question whether these are really amounting to a highly congested central city of Beijing, as we have been hearing. Okay, the rail system is in the Kanto region of Greater Tokyo is really quite different than it is in Beijing, and it developed early and it developed over the territory before the road system developed. And the development, so this is kind of a zoom in on Chiyoda district in the center, but if we zoom out, we see those rail lines continuing to extend into the hinterland right up to the foothills of Mount Fuji, and over to Chiba and down to Yokohama, over a really extensive area. And so the development has happened over this large area, largely in single and two-story buildings, but quite densely built over that territory. There you have it. What is happening today, though, is that the city is becoming denser in the core area. So there's a lot of new development in the central, not just Chiyoda district, but Yokohama, and in Chiba. So there's a recentering of the population in Tokyo from the rest of Japan as well, but from the region. And along a lot of these suburban rail lines, they are experiencing population loss, actually whole communities where half of the houses are unoccupied. So the rail companies are shrinking back their service to some of these suburban areas in Tokyo, as well as in many other Japanese cities. So that's interesting, and that is a big difference, I think, with what is happening in Beijing, which appears to be going in quite the opposite direction. Okay, and that's a real zoom out. Okay, the employment distribution in Beijing, we saw a diagram in the previous talk that showed something like this. So the employment is heavily concentrated currently between the 2nd and the 4th Ring roads, in part because, as we know, the Forbidden City and the historic core will not be redeveloped for that kind of office and employment activity. But it is happening between the 2nd and the 4th Ring road. And those bus commutes come from the City Lab here in Beijing. But in terms of accessibility, what we can say, and this is again the work of my former PhD student, accessibility would be optimized by building employment between the 4th and the 5th ring road. Now that implies a different kind of rail infrastructure than is actually being built currently in Beijing. But that is one of the clear ways we can go about improving accessibility and shortening the commuting time, regardless of where people live and where their jobs are, except that they should be, of course, between the 4th and the 5th ring roads. So we can see this same situation in Shanghai. This is the only picture I have of that, but and I don't know if you can see the pale yellow, but basically the pale yellow, which is relatively low residential density, is covering the whole of the city province, and the employment is increasingly concentrated in the core area. So they're experiencing the same kind of issue as Beijing is in terms of the lengthening commuting time and congestion on both the road system and the metro system. In the case of Beijing, the majority of the lines are already overloaded. And if you want to experience that directly, go in about an hour, I guess, to Haidian Huangzhuang station here, the interchange station, and you can wait in line to get past the security check in order to get to the platform, if you want to experience what that means. In suburban, because they need to control the people, in peri-urban Beijing, you may wait up to half an hour before you can enter the station in the morning at commuting time. So the system is overloaded. And there are only limited parts of the line, including this one out here on line 4, which are not overloaded. So this is a kind of a crisis situation in the city, and how to handle that. That's a lot of what we're talking about in terms of megacity problems. So what we have seen, I reviewed all the literature on CBDs development, and particularly in North America. And this is well known, it's well documented. You have a kind of hierarchy of CBDs in the city. The original CBDs maintain their important activities, that is the FIRE, finance, insurance, and real estate activities remain in those core areas, and you get the development of subsidiary CBDs in outlying areas, these all being functionally connected together. It is not something, as I say, after the year 2000 that Chinese cities, especially the largest cities, have tried to emphasize, with the exception of Shenzhen, which I will mention in a minute. Mostly it has been concentrated on this single, monocentric, highly visible CBD with globalization images, particularly architecture designed by foreign architects. So that has been the emphasis. But if you look at the cases worldwide, you will see that the right structure, or one that seems to operate not as a result of public policy but as a result of market development, is this hierarchical arrangement of CBDs. Okay, so that's that point. Shenzhen, as I say, is somewhat different, and they claimed to have to be very different because the city is a long strip and not very deep. So quite early on, well, the first was Luohu, of course, developed, and then initially, that was the initial development, and then quickly outgrew its capacity, and they went on to Futian. Hohai is just being completed, and Qianhai is the future. So the idea is a multi-unit CBD system. We'll see if it works. And that, of course, is partly to reduce commuting times. Again, I'm not sure it'll work, but it might. What we do know is that the travel inside the districts is much greater than the travel between districts. And the little arrows there are basically between the districts. But the road system has been thought of right from the beginning as a whole integrated structure. So what happens, of course, is that those major arterials and expressways are being used both by people who are traveling short distances in the city and people who are traveling between districts. So this is my case to just illustrate that point. 2007 in Huaqiangbei and 2013. So the growing load of traffic on the surrounding streets around Huaqiangbei has almost nothing to do with what is going on inside Huaqiangbei. This is travel from one point to another point in the city. So this is probably repeated over a lot of parts of the city. Beijing's road congestion at evening peak hour. Well, I said here 71% of the arterial road system is well below capacity at peak time. We're always talking about Beijing having the most congested road system maybe in the world. I don't believe it. It's at key intersections, especially with the radial roads leading out of the ring roads. You can see that pattern day by day. Okay, so there are solutions to these problems, and I think this is one of them. We do know that commuting travel, is below 5 kilometers for half of the population within that area of Beijing. So why aren't they on bicycle? There are reasons why they're not on bicycle, but they could be on bicycle, is the point. So our problems of overloading on the metro are a result of eliminating the bicycle, if I can put it in those terms. So these are, let me very quickly, and I'll stop. Reurbanization is the way we need to go. That has been said. I know it's not easy. Here's the Gare d'Austerlitz in Paris being overbuilt with an office center. So using disused rail yards is one of the ways to go. I just did this myself. Here's a huge interchange occupying 43 hectares. I calculated how much that is worth if it was buildable land, and here's how many units you could get on it if you built it 2.6 FAR, 17,900 units. Why are we building beyond the 6th ring road? Okay, I'm not answering that question. Same thing, Zhongguancun, just south of here, it's underbuilt. It's at 2.6 FAR for a CBD, astonishingly low. The road system is way over-designed for the traffic demands. We monitored this. We know how much road capacity is needed. You could fill it up with trees, or you could fill it up with buildings. There are options here in terms of re-urbanizing an area like Zhongguancun. So here it is. Here's the conclusion, and then I'll stop. So I begin to think that this problem that we are talking about, it's not a false problem, but it can be thought about in different ways. And if we look for high-tech, large-scale, integrated solutions to what appears to be a large-scale integrated problem, I don't think we're going to get the answers. We'll just be multiplying our technological prowess for the purposes of temporarily solving a problem which is structural. We need to think about reurbanizing our city and recalibrating our transport infrastructure. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.